Hi everybody, welcome back to Summer Reading Nights. We're going to continue on with The Witches. Like I said before, they have made 2 movies out of this book. The first one was way back I think in the early 80s. That's the original movie, and then they currently last year just showed a re-release movie of The Witches 2 on TV. So we're going to continue at part 2 of this book, and we're starting off with Grandma is telling her grandson about a couple stories that she had witnessed or heard about witches taking children and what happens to them. So we're going to continue on. Grandma here is now telling her grandson a third story she found out about a boy or a girl that disappeared with the witches, and they don't know what happened. So we're going to continue on. The third one was little Bridget Svensson, my grandma said. She lived just across the road from us. One day she was starting to grow feathers all over her body. Within a month, she had turned into a large white chicken. Her parents kept her for years in a pen in the garden. She even laid eggs. Well, what color eggs? I said. Brown ones, the biggest eggs I've ever seen in my life. Her mother made omelets out of them. Delicious they were. I gazed up at my grandmother, who sat there like an ancient queen on her throne. Her eyes were misty gray, and they seemed to be looking at something many miles away. The cigar was the only real thing about her at the moment, and the smoke it made billowed around her head in blue clouds. But the little girl who became a chicken didn't disappear? No, not Bridget. She lived on for many years, laying brown eggs. You said all of them disappeared. Well, I made a mistake, my grandma said. I'm getting old and I can't remember everything. What happened to the fourth child? The fourth was a boy called Harold, my grandma said, and one morning his skin went all grayish yellow, and then it became hard and crackly like a shell of a nut, and by evening the boy had turned into stone. Stone? You mean a real stone? Granite. I'll take you to see him if you like. They still keep him in the house. He stands in the hall, a little stone statue. Visitors lean their umbrellas up against him. And here's a picture that they have of him. Let's see there. Of the little boy in stone, supposedly holding the umbrellas. Although I was very young, I was not prepared to believe everything that Grandma had told me. Yet, when she spoke with such conviction, with such utter seriousness, and with never a smile on her face or a twinkle in her eye, that I found myself beginning to wonder. Go on, Grandmama, I said. You told me there were 5 altogether. What happened to the last one? Would you like a puff of my cigar? She said. I'm only 7, Grandmama. I don't care what age you are. You'll never catch a cold if you smoke cigars. What about number 5, Grandmama? Number 5 was rather an interesting case. A 9-year-old boy named Leaf was summer holidaying with his family on a fjord, and the whole family was picnicking and swimming off some rocks on one of those little islands. Young Leaf dived into the water, and his father, who was watching him, noticed he stayed under for an unusually long time. When he came to the surface at last, he wasn't Leaf at all. Well, what was he, Grandmama? He was a porpoise. He wasn't. He couldn't have been. He was a lovely young porpoise, she said, and as friendly as can be. Grandmama, I said. Yes, my darling. Did he really and truly turn into a porpoise? Absolutely. I know his mother well. She told me all about it. She told me how Leaf the porpoise stayed with them all afternoon, giving his brothers and sisters rides on his back. They had a wonderful time, and he waved a flipper at them and swam away, never to be seen again. But, Grandmama, how did they know that the porpoise was actually Leaf? He talked to them. He laughed and joked out with them all the time and giving them rides. But wasn't there a tremendous fuss when this happened? I said. Not much. You must remember that here in Norway, we are used to such a thing. There are witches everywhere. There's probably one living in our street on this very moment. It's time you went to bed. A witch wouldn't come in through my window at night, would she? I asked. No, a witch will never do silly things like climbing up drain pipes or breaking into people's homes. You'll be quite safe in your bed. Come along and I'll tuck you in. The next evening, after my grandmother had given me a bath, she took me once again into the living room for another story. Tonight, the old woman said, I'm going to tell you how to recognize a witch when you see one. Can you always be sure? I asked. No, you can't, and that's the trouble, but you can make pretty good guesses. She was dropping cigar ash all over her lap, and I hoped she wasn't going to catch on fire before she told me how to recognize a witch. In the first place, a real witch is certain always to be wearing gloves when you meet her. Surely not always, but what about in the summer when it's hot? Even in the summer, she has to. Do you know why? Well, why? I asked. Because she doesn't have fingernails. Instead of fingernails, she has a thin, curvy claw like a cat, and she wears the gloves to hide them. Mind you, lots of very respectable women wear gloves, especially in the winter, so this doesn't help you very much. Mama used to wear gloves, I said. Not in the house. Witches wear gloves even in the house. They only take them off when they go to bed. How do you know all this, Grandmama? Don't interrupt. Just take it all in. The second thing to remember is that a real witch is always bald. Bald, I said. Bald as a boiled egg, said Grandma. I was shocked. There was something indecent about a bald woman. Why are they bald, Grandmama? Don't ask me why, but you can take it from me that not a single hair grows on a witch's head. Ew, how horrid. Disgusting, said my grandmother. If she's bald, she'll be easy to spot, I said. Not at all. A real witch always wears a wig, just to hide her baldness. She wears a first-class wig, and it's almost impossible to tell a really first-class wig from ordinary hair unless you give it a pull to see if it comes off. And then that's what I'll do, I said. Don't be foolish, said Grandmother. You can't go around pulling at hair on every lady you meet, even if she's wearing gloves. Just try it and see what happens. So that doesn't help me either, I said. None of these things is any good on its own. It's only when you put them all together that they begin to make a little sense. Mind you, these wigs do cause a rather serious problem for witches. Well, what kind of problem, Grandma? They make the scalp itch most terribly. You see, when an actress wears a wig, or if you and I were to wear a wig, we would be putting it on over our hair, but a witch has to put it straight over her naked scalp. And the underneath of a wig is always rough and scratchy. It sets up a frightful itch on the bald skin. It causes nasty sores on the head, wig rash, the witches call it, and it doesn't half itch. What other things must I look for to recognize a witch? Look for the nose holes. Witches have slightly larger nose holes than ordinary people. The rim of each nose hole is pink and curvy, like the rim of a certain kind of seashell. Why do they have such big nose holes? For smelling with. A real witch has the most amazing powers of smell. She can actually smell out of a child who is standing on the other side of the street on a pitch black night. She couldn't smell me, I just had a bath. Oh yes, she could. The cleaner you happen to be, the more smelly you are to a witch. That can't be true, I said. An absolutely clean child gives out the most ghastly stench to a witch. The dirtier you are, the less you smell. But that doesn't make sense, Grandma. Oh, yes, it does. It isn't the dirt that the witch is smelling. It is you. The smell that drives a witch mad actually comes right out of your own skin. It comes oozing out of your skin in waves, and these waves, stink waves, the witches call them, go floating through the air and hit the witch right smack in the nostrils. They send her reeling. Now wait a minute, Grandmama. Don't interrupt. The point is, when you haven't washed for a week and your skin is all covered with dirt, then quite obviously the stink waves cannot come oozing out nearly as strongly. Well, then I should never have a bath again, I said. Just don't have one too often. Once a month is quite enough for a sensible child. It was at moments like this I loved my grandmother more than ever. Grandmama, if it's a dark night, how can a witch smell the difference between a child and a grown-up? Because grown-ups don't give out stink waves, only children do. But I don't give out stink waves, do I? I'm not giving them out at this very moment, am I? Not to me you aren't. To me you're smelling like raspberries and cream, but to a witch you'd be smelling absolutely disgusting. Well, what would I be smelling of? Dog droppings, Grandma said. I reeled. I was stunned. Dog droppings? I am not smelling of dog droppings. I don't believe it, and I won't believe it. What's more, to a witch, you'd be smelling of fresh dog droppings. That is simply not true. I am not smelling of dog droppings, stale or fresh. There's no point in arguing about it, said Grandma. It's a fact of life. I was outraged. I simply couldn't bring myself to believe what my grandmother was telling me. So if you see this woman holding her nose and she passes you in the street, that woman could easily be a witch. I decided to change the subject. Tell me what else to look for in a witch, I said. The eyes. Look carefully at the eyes, because the eyes of a real witch are different from yours and mine. Look in the middle of each eye where there is normally a little black dot. If she is a witch, the black dot will keep changing color, and you will see fire, and you will see ice dancing right in the very center of the colored dot. It will send shivers running all over your skin. My grandmother leaned back in her chair and sucked away contentedly in her foul black cigar. I squatted on the floor staring at her, fascinated. She was not smiling. She looked deadly serious. Are there other things? I asked her. Of course there are other things, my grandma said. You don't seem to understand that witches are not actually human beings at all. They look like humans, they talk like humans, and they are able to act like humans. But in actual fact, they are totally animals. They are demons in human shape. That is why they have claws and bald heads and weird noses and peculiar eyes, all of which they have to conceal as the best they can from the rest of the world. What else is different from them, Grandmama? The feet. Witches never have toes. No toes? Then what do they have? They just have feet. The feet have square ends with no toes on them at all. Does that make it difficult to walk, I asked. Not at all, but it does give them a problem with their shoes. All ladies like to wear small, rather pointed shoes, but a witch, whose feet are very wide and square at the ends, has the most awful job squeezing her feet into those little pointed shoes. Well, why doesn't she wear wide, comfy shoes with square ends? She dare not. Just as she hides her baldness with a wig, she must hide her ugly witch's feet by squeezing them into pretty shoes. Well, isn't that terribly uncomfortable, I said. Extremely uncomfortable, but she has to put up with it. If she's wearing ordinary shoes, it won't help me to recognize her, will it, Grandmama? I'm afraid it won't. You might possibly see her limping very slightly, but only if you're watching her closely. Are those the only differences then, Grandmama? There's one more, just one more. Well, what is it, Grandmama? Their spit is blue. Blue? Not blue. Their spit can't be blue. Blue is a bilberry, she said. You don't mean it, Grandmama. Nobody can have blue spit. Well, witches can, she said. Is it like ink? I asked. Exactly. They even use it to write with. They use those old-fashioned pens that have nibs, and they simply lick the nib. Can you notice the blue spit, Grandmama? If a witch was talking to me, would I be able to notice it? Only if you looked carefully, my grandmother said. If you looked very carefully, you would probably see a slight bluish tinge on her teeth, but it doesn't show much. It would if she spit, I said. Witches never spit. They daren't. I couldn't believe my grandmother would be lying to me. She went to church every morning of the week that she said grace before every meal, and somebody who did that would never tell lies. I was beginning to believe every word she spoke. So there you are. That's about all I can tell you. None of it is very helpful. You can still never be absolutely sure whether a woman is a witch or not just a witch just by looking at her. But if she was wearing gloves, if she has a large large nose hole, if she's wearing gloves, queer eyes, and her hair looks like though it may be a wig, and she has bluish tinge in her teeth, if all those things, then you run like mad. And here's an illustration of what they think the witches look like when they're licking the pen with their blue spit. Grandmama, I said, when you were a little girl, did you ever meet a witch? Once, and only once. Well, what happened? I'm not going to tell you. It would frighten you out of your skin and give you bad dreams. Please, I begged. No, certain things are too horrible to talk about. Does it have something to do with your missing thumb? Suddenly, her old wrinkled lips shut tight as a pair of tongs, and her hand that held the cigar, which had no thumb on it, began to quiver very slightly. I waited. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. All of a sudden, she shut herself off completely, and the conversation was finished. "Good night, Grandmama," I said, rising from the floor and kissing her cheek. She didn't move. I crept out of the room and went out to my bedroom. We're going to stop here and continue with the next video. We'll take a little break, and I'll see you back in the next one, okay? Bye.